It's day 43 of the war in Ukraine. Kiev is more than 4,500 kilometers away from New Delhi, but every day of this war has been a test for India. A test of India's neutrality as the world split in two camps, pro-America and pro-Russia. Now, India, as you know, has strategic partnerships with both these countries, the US and Russia. And as this war drags on, these equations are being tested. So far, India has abstained from votes that hurt either side, but today's vote is tricky. Today, a choice must be made. The vote itself is not so much consequence as India's position on it. And as we wait for that result, or which way India goes, we want to dwell on the hypocrisy of the situation. How the Western camp is living in a glass house as it preaches and puts pressure on India. Europe continues to bankroll Russia's war with billions of dollars every month. America continues to buy vital supplies from Russia, which it has conveniently left out of the sanctions list. But for India, they have lectures. For India, they have diplomats who spell out consequences and wax eloquent on one's place in history books. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss the absurdity of the situation. The big decision has come in Pakistan. We'll go to it in just a bit. But for the moment, we can tell you what's happening at the United Nations General Assembly. They say diplomacy is slow and boring, but not on days like this. Today's diplomacy is shaping up to be a thriller. The setting is the United Nations General Assembly. The protagonist is India, and on trial is India's neutrality. As we speak, an important vote is underway, a vote to expel Russia from the Human Rights Council, and we are tracking that live. For the moment, like I said, I want to take you to what's happening in Pakistan. And this is a very big story that's developing. For days, we've been waiting for what happens at the Supreme Court on the legality of Imran Khan's decision. Well, we now have a verdict, and the decision has gone against Imran Khan. And that is what the 5-judge bench, I'm told, has unanimously declared. The Chief Justice of Pakistan was part of this decision, along with 4 other judges, and they've all been called pro-army in the past. Now, they've delivered their verdict, and they have, in fact, been speaking about it. The observations made it amply clear that this was not going to be a match that Imran Khan was winning. That verdict is still being delivered as we speak. It has overruled the decision to dissolve the country's assembly. Remember, the National Assembly was dissolved. Imran Khan wanted a snap election. The court has called the actions of Pakistan's deputy speaker unconstitutional. That is the big decision coming right now. If I could take you through the observations that led to this ruling. The first one was by the Chief Justice of Pakistan. He said, and I'm quoting, the ruling of the Deputy Speaker was erroneous. Now they've labelled it as unconstitutional. Prima facie, the ruling is a violation of Article 95. By calling for elections, the country has been left hapless for 90 days. This is what the Chief Justice of Pakistan said. Then we had an observation by Justice Mazhar Alam Khan. He said, isn't the court the guardian of the Constitution? How will justice be done if someone is affected by the parliamentary proceedings? If there is no justice, will the court remain silent? So you see, the build-up was very much there. Then we had an observation by Justice Jamal Khan Mandokhel. He said, and I'm quoting, elected members of the people were present in the House. Deputy Speaker gave a ruling against them. Isn't the ruling against the will of public representatives out of parliamentary procedure? And then we have Justice Munib Akhtar. This is what he said while the case was being heard today. The Speaker is the caretaker of the House. The Speaker does not sit just for his personal satisfaction. The Speaker cannot just say goodbye to the rest of the members. The writing was on the wall for Imran Khan. Remember, he has been in election mode, and he's been addressing the people of his country. He has hit the streets and the screens. He has made multiple appearances on Pakistani television channels, including doing a dial-in show where he spoke to some people, and that did not go as planned because some of the statements were uncharitable. But Imran Khan has been trying to reach out to his people and portray himself as a victim of a system that does not want an independent policy maker at the helm. He insinuated that there was an American hand And that is a statement that he made, immediately correcting himself, saying that there was a foreign hand that was behind the conspiracy to unseat him. And he has not been able to prove that. He claimed to have a letter which would prove this assertion, but that letter has not been shared with the world as of now. The army has since spoken. We've heard from General Bajwa, the army chief of Pakistan, who has said that the West, in fact the US, remains a friend, and the best weapons in their arsenal are the weapons that the Americans gave. He has condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the army has set a line diametrically opposite to what Imran Khan has said so far. So this is the stage that was being set all these days. Many said that the court was adjourning the matter indefinitely. Day after day, we heard hearings, and then the court said that they will decide on it later because they were waiting for a decision from the real decision makers, which is the army of Pakistan. Well, now the court has spoken, and the deputy speaker's ruling has been set aside, which basically means that there will be a no confidence motion in Pakistan. This is high voltage drama playing out. These are images from earlier today, and we're told that there's a lot of security that has been deployed here, because if the verdict goes against Imran Khan, which it has gone right now, there was a fear that there could be violence. And Imran Khan has been threatening that the consequences will not be good if he is made to sit outside the house, if he is made to join the ranks of the opposition. So that is where things stand as of now. A lot of drama in Islamabad, and we've seen this crisis play out. A no trust motion will take place now. Remember, there was going to be a big no confidence vote on Sunday. That did not happen after Imran Khan, with the help of the deputy speaker, got the assembly dissolved. The Pakistan Supreme Court has now ruled that the advice by Prime Minister to the President was unconstitutional. The Pakistan Supreme Court has also quashed all actions taken by the President. It has overruled the rejection of the no trust motion. The court has overruled the Deputy Speaker's ruling. And this, I can tell you, is a unanimous verdict by the 5 judges of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. The Supreme Court clearly stating that the advice by the Prime Minister to the President was unconstitutional, and the no confidence motion will be put to vote on Saturday. So this is where things stand. It's a big setback for Imran Khan, who wanted to call a snap election earlier today. The Election Commission of Pakistan said that it will not be possible for them to conduct an election at such a short notice.
के ऊपर देख रहा है 27 रमज़ान को ये पाकिस्तान वजूद में आया था। ये इस तरह की साजिश इंशाल्लाह ये कौम कामयाब नहीं होने देगी। तो जो
So the ruling of the Deputy Speaker given on the floor of the House on the 3rd of April for NCM against Prime Minister under Article 35, for which notice was given, has been declared contrary to the Constitution and hereby set aside. This is what the court has said in its verdict. It has declared that the advice by the Prime Minister to the President was contrary to the Constitution. All actions done are of no legal effect and quashed. So this is the gist of what the Supreme Court of Pakistan has just ruled. The country's top court has delivered its verdict, and it has set aside the decision to dissolve Pakistan's National Assembly, calling the actions of Pakistan's Deputy Speaker unconstitutional, meaning a snap election will not take place, a no-trust motion will be put to vote on Saturday. This is what the Supreme Court of Pakistan has decided, a unanimous verdict by a 5-judge bench, saying that Imran Khan will have to face that no-trust vote. And security, like I said, had been stepped up ahead of this verdict. Troops from the Frontier Corps were deployed because authorities feared there could be violence if the verdict is not in favor of Imran Khan. We'll have to see how this plays out in the streets of Pakistan and also in the political circles. Remember, there's been a lot of buzz, a lot of allegations flowing back and forth, with many confidants, friends and family of Imran Khan leaving the country, and the opposition saying that this has to be stopped and that they're running away with money that they took as bribes. Joining me from Islamabad is my colleague Anas Malik, WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief. Anas, this is a big setback for Imran Khan. What happens next?
It's a big win for restoration of law to what the actions that he saw, the dictatorial actions that he saw of Imran Khan the other day on Sunday, they have been set aside by the court, and it's all jubilation around the Pakistani Supreme Court. People are literally crying, they're overwhelmed, they're overjoyed, because for one reason, previously we've seen that doctrine of necessity has been invoked in Pakistan for such measures, and there's always been talk of moving forward. But this one particular instance, the court made sure that the doctrine of necessity was buried for good, and the law and constitution prevails, and rightly so. And this is exactly what has been done today by the court. A unanimous verdict, a 5-0 verdict. They set aside everything. They set aside all of the actions of the incumbent government. They've restored the parliament. They've restored democracy. They've restored the constitution. They've made sure that the constitution remains supreme. As I talk to you, there are chants against the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. There are the lawyer of Supreme Court bar. He's being held on shoulders by other lawyers. I see the People's Party lawyers around me. They're overwhelmed with joy. What happens next is that on Saturday is when the vote of no confidence will be done at the assembly. That's lawful. Any member parliament who's defecting, his fate will not be judged, at least for the time being, until he votes or he or she votes. That is something that has been made very clear by the Pakistani parliament, by the Pakistani judiciary, pardon me on that. So going forward, this is how things will roll. In case if Imran Khan loses the no confidence vote, then it's history. He's going to go for the opposition benches. But none of the actions that he's done on Sunday, including the dissolution of assemblies, none of them hold currently before the court. Palki.
Right, Anna, stay with us. We are also being joined by Ambassador Abdul Basit from Islamabad. He's the former Pakistani High Commissioner to India and the Director General of the Islamabad Center for Regional Studies. Ambassador Basit, good to have you on Gravitas. Did you see this coming, this order by the Supreme Court of Pakistan?
Yeah, as we were discussing the other day on your channel, I was very clear that the Supreme Court, the basic point in front of the Supreme Court or before the Supreme Court is to whether or not Article 5A could be invoked when the no confidence motion is on the agenda item. So I was rather convinced that this is the best way forward. The Supreme Court should not take any via media decision. It is important, and now we are very glad that the Supreme Court took this decision. Now what I'm saying is that as previously I did think that perhaps elections may take this year, but now it seems that this assembly would complete its 5-year term, which is good for Pakistan in my view. And then secondly, because we are facing severe economic problems, so this government would need time to see as to how to bring the economy, put the economy back on rails, and that is very, very important. So I think overall the decision is good for Pakistan, and let's see how Mr. Imran Khan now reacts. But he has been left with no other option in my view. He will have to be agreeable to this, and yes, he will immediately start rallying people behind him. That is given. But now I think after a few months, once the budget is presented, we will see electoral activity going full throttle.
I know whatever is happening is largely political, Ambassador Basit, but the then Prime Minister, and now I'm assuming will be a leader of the opposition, has clearly said that this is the result of a foreign conspiracy. His own army chief has contradicted him on most policy matters. As a seasoned diplomat, how do you think this reflects on Pakistan, and how would the world be looking at Pakistan and the way decisions are taken and the way policymakers sort of bring everything into the mix to save their position of power?
As a result of this ruling, Imran Khan is now the Prime Minister of Pakistan till time the no confidence motion is taken up by the National Assembly. As far as the conspiracy theory is concerned, I personally never lent any credibility to that, because we all know that how interstate relations work. That was one part. Other states do try to topple governments if they're not to their liking. That is something, history is replete with such examples. But the major question was, and I think it will continue to be discussed in the political arena, whether there were people who collaborated domestically. And that was the aspect which Imran Khan wanted to project or tell to the people of Pakistan. There are people in the opposition who were actively conniving with the US, and that was the dangerous game that was being played, because that inevitably injected more mutual apprehensions between Pakistan and the US. Then subsequently we saw that how the army chief in his statement said the Islamabad security dialogue tried to control the damage by making a statement that Pakistan would like to have a strategic relationship with the US, since US is our largest trading partner and we have huge US investments in Pakistan. So I think this government, new government in a coalition, now we will have a coalition government in any case, under the Prime Ministership of Shehbaz Sharif, would be able to reach out to the US while maintaining our strategic partnership with China. That goes without saying, because during the Nawaz Sharif time, we had seen how Pakistan Muslim League government tried to strengthen, augment this relationship. But that doesn't mean that our relationship with America or with the US cannot be really improved. So my own feeling is that this is a good decision. As was mentioned, someone mentioned that it has also buried the doctrine of necessity in Pakistan, which is good for the constitution, for the supremacy of the constitution. And I think Pakistanis, by and large, should be content with this ruling by the Supreme Court.
Ambassador Basit, I'm going to request you to stay with us. Imtiaz Gul, senior journalist, also joining us from Islamabad. Imtiaz Gul, what next for Imran Khan?
Well, I think they should be meeting right now, Imran Khan with all his close cohorts, and discussing the next move. And they had earlier indicated, although not officially, that they may resign and block if there is an adverse ruling by the Supreme Court. So we don't know whether they still believe in that and whether they will stick to this decision, because now the session has been called of the National Assembly for the 9th. And this basically means everything has been restored, and the Prime Minister is back as a full-time Prime Minister, and now he has to face the vote of no confidence. But it is quite weird. It's a quite weird, unprecedented situation in which all steps that have been taken since Sunday will have to be reversed to enable the Parliament to vote out the Prime Minister.
Ambassador Basit, would you say that Imran Khan enjoys the popular support that he claims that he enjoys?
He is still a very popular leader. There is no question about that. But the question remains, we will all know when the next election comes. He is popular. People blindly follow him, and he has a huge following. There is no question. But if this popularity can be converted into power, that we will see whenever elections take place. But he has the power to bring the people to streets. But whether he can, now the question for him is really whether he would like to appear to be acting or following the constitution, or he would still like to go to or resort to agitation politics, because Pakistan cannot really afford to go down that route. Agitation politics will further harm Pakistan's economy, will further destabilize the country. We have next door Afghanistan. We know how things are. So Pakistan does need, a period of stability. And then Election Commission as well, we saw today that it does have some reservations about holding elections in 3 months. So my feeling is that assemblies will now complete their 5-year term. So, one other aspect which would have affected the elections of the National Assembly at this point in time, because the provincial assemblies were not really ready to dissolve themselves. And in Pakistan, elections of the provincial assemblies and the National Assembly have always taken place concurrently. So this is also, this would also kind of, take care of that problem if elections are held next year as originally scheduled into 2023. But if I were Imran Khan, I would go, though he would try to keep the conspiracy theory alive, and he will build his narrative around that theory in order to gain more and more public support. But on the other hand, if he goes too much to agitational politics, then my feeling is he would lose further support, because overall the economy is not in a situation where Pakistan or the people of Pakistan can afford instability in the country.
Very interesting point. Hamid Khan, senior journalist, is also joining us. Hamid Khan, your take on what has come. Did this take anybody by surprise, really, this verdict? And what happens next? Do you think Imran Khan, the sitting Prime Minister of Pakistan, is going to indulge in what Ambassador Basit is calling agitation politics?
Clearly told by the Supreme Court that this ruling by the Deputy Speaker was unconstitutional. So as far as the understanding of the verdict of the Supreme Court is saying, it was quite obvious. But on the other hand, I believe that Imran Khan would not go for a agitation like violence or anything. He will go for he will have to restart his political struggle, which he claimed that he's been doing it for the 22 years prior to coming into the power. But this time, he is coming with a different narrative. And this narrative is for the independent foreign policy of the country. So let's see how people, react on it. So far, he's been very successful for gaining his popularity again, despite of his decline in his popularity due to non-control of inflation and dollar prices and other things matter inside the country. But I would say that the decision, the verdict of the Supreme Court has shown that the judiciary is very independent in the country, and the people who claim that everything is influenced, no, nothing is influenced. There is no interference of the establishment, and we need to understand that Pakistan is getting stronger and stronger in terms of democratic process and political process. So I think we should look into the positive of this verdict, and yes, Prime Minister has to face the vote of no confidence on Saturday.
Right. I did not even suggest that there was interference of the establishment. You're the one who said it.
I said that so many Indian channels that keep saying it, so I have to say that.
Okay. You preempted a question that I was never going to ask.
Don't preempt.
But Ambassador Basit, you say that Pakistan needs a phase of stability, and when the sitting Prime Minister, you fear, is going to indulge in agitation politics, who is going to bring that stability? Is it then the army? And is your country then caught in that vicious cycle?
No, I thought, I'm not saying that he would necessarily go into
He's threatened. He has said enough. He said enough that he might take that route.
He might take that route. But, it is important from his perspective, too, that he now focuses in strengthening his party, because there were many people who joined him but now ditched him at the 11th hour. So it is very important that he uses this time period to strengthen his party and not only to widen his support base, but also the leadership at the leadership level as well. Because his major failure has been that he has not been able to convert his political party into an institution. It continues to be a one-man show, frankly speaking. So it is imperative for him and for his legacy that he strengthens his party, institutionalizes it in ways that there are people who can be trusted and who are his ideological supporters rather than fair weather friends. So I think this is a good time. He can use this time period in order to then emerge. If he wants to come to power again, I think it will be important for him to look inwards as well as to where did he go wrong during the last 3.5 years. He did not really have a team which could deliver in meaningful terms for the people of Pakistan. And then he finally ended up by creating this myth of conspiracy against him, international conspiracy. So I think it is important for him, because he does have a broad political public support. It is important for him to see as to how he can now strengthen his party, and that will be very, very critical for him in the next election.
Imtiaz Gul, the failure on policy matters and delivering for the people is important, but the rift with the army cannot be overstated. Do you think it's Shehbaz Sharif next in the Prime Minister's chair, or is it too premature?
Well, I think this is what all the opposition parties had indicated, that Shehbaz Sharif will be the next Prime Minister. So finally, his dream would likely come true, just in case nothing else happens. So we'll see, I think, how Imran Khan's party now reacts to, as I said earlier, and if the party resigns it, this would mean almost 1/3 of the Parliament of the National Assembly would be out. And then it would give rise to the question as to whether the National Parliament can function with 1/3 missing minority, or whether the Election Commission will go for by-elections. So there are a few questions that still need to be answered, but I guess this is a very good opportunity for Imran Khan and his party to introspect as to what went wrong, as to why they have been living in this contradiction of being in the parliament, but then not ready to talk to the opposition leaders. So this was a big contradiction that Imran Khan basically moved with, and I think probably he will now introspect also about the people who are on his right and left, and who basically engineered the exit of a lot of veteran PTI people. And the rift with the military, I think this is also, it's not overstated, it's a reality that became very obvious in October last year. But and thereafter the cleavage, I think, widened. The rift became so manifest as in many other issues. And then also, I think his claim, Imran Khan's claim of this conspiracy, to what extent can he now sell that to the youth of this country? And I think he's pinning his hopes on the youth itself. But whether there's the very big question that if, according to Imran Khan, there has been a conspiracy against him, whether then he will be allowed to return to power despite an overwhelming support base for him.
Right. Imtiaz Gul, I'm told you have to leave, so I'm going to thank you. I'll take one question with Hamid Khan. We earlier said on this broadcast that Imran Khan thought he'd played a googly, but it was a full toss. And he upset a lot of influential individuals in his country and upset some power equations. What do you think he has in store, Imran Khan, the politician?
I would say that Imran Khan is the kind of person who has always come across more than a populist politician rather than a traditional politician. So he will again carry on his populist politics, and I believe that he has a lot of things to come forward to the public as well in coming election, and he would be working hard for his coming election. But I would say that this time period between from now onwards to the next election, whether it is 6 months or whether it is 1 year or whether it is maybe few months, everybody has to be very much cautious about the situation, about the economical situation in the country. Whosoever is going to take over, whether it is Shehbaz Sharif or anyone, it is not going to be an easy task for even Shehbaz Sharif. On the other hand, I think it is maturity of the political culture in Pakistan, and things will get prosper in Pakistan as well.
Right. Hamid Khan, Ambassador Abdul Basit, thanks very much for joining us. Let me also thank my colleague Anas Malik for bringing us that update from Pakistan. So this is a verdict that clearly goes against Prime Minister Imran Khan. He will have to face that trust vote come Saturday. And of course, we'll be bringing you that high voltage drama right here on Beyond as we've been tracking the story from the word go. Very interesting times for Pakistan, a lot of chaos too, and there is a fear that Imran Khan might hit the streets and start the agitation politics that we just discussed. Another big story was developing as we began this show. We began with that story. We told you that the United Nations was going to vote, and it was an important vote in the UN General Assembly. While the subject was on what happened in Ukraine, the protagonist in this vote was India, and India's neutrality was on trial. We can tell you now that India has voted. India has in fact abstained. This was a vote to expel Russia from the Human Rights Council, and we've been tracking this vote live. And let me give you this context to help explain why this vote was so important. Since the war broke out, the United Nations has voted 9 times on Russia, and each time India has abstained. It has refused to side either with Russia or the West. Today was the 10th such vote, and it's not like the previous ones. This resolution is to remove a country from a United Nations agency, to remove Russia from the Human Rights Council. And for that, you need a 2/3 majority. But there was a catch. Abstentions do not matter. Only those present and voting count. So if you abstain, it's as good as voting against Russia. And that's what Moscow has said. Moscow reminded all countries going into the vote that an abstention will mean that you're voting against Russia. And India, we are told, has abstained. An abstention will be considered an unfriendly gesture by Russia. So you're either with us or against us. And this did put India in a very tough spot. Voting in favor of the resolution was out of the question for India. It would be like openly condemning Russia. So New Delhi had 2 options, either abstain or vote against it. And India has decided on abstention. We have the answer now. But what happens once India abstains? It's definitely going to please the Western countries. That is one obvious consequence. Plus, it would be a vote on principles, and that is what India has followed throughout. Remember, Minister Jaishankar said in the parliament yesterday that we are in favor of peace. We are favoring neither the Russians nor the Americans. India was not going to vote against it. That would make the Russians very happy, but would have burned some bridges with the West. That's not something that India has done. So it's an abstention. And India perhaps would be looking at damage control to make the best of a bad situation. That's what New Delhi seems to have decided, and not get into camp politics. This was not a situation that could have been evaded, and India has so far said that it is not a party to this conflict and it just wants peace. It has said those same things again, that both sides should come together and talk. India also interestingly condemned the massacre in Bucha, calling it a massacre in so many words at the United Nations in a statement earlier this week. Now, first we heard the warnings and lectures from America, and now Russia is using the same language, and India has been subjected to both these camps. Neither side has really grasped India's position. It's not about picking one country or another. It's about picking your own country, and that is what New Delhi has tried to do. That is the essence of neutrality. And this vote has not changed that. It is a vote of circumstances, not a vote of politics. Now, enough countries are voting against Russia, we know that. Ever since this war began, even before the war began, even before the talk of the sanctions began, a lot of countries have spoken against Russia, condemned Russia, but that has not changed the fact that the war still continues on the ground. For the West, all of this has been symbolic. The Human Rights Council, the G20, it's all about scoring symbolic victories against Russia. On the ground, it doesn't change a thing. Remember, in 2014, Russia invaded Crimea. The West responded with one such symbolic move. They kicked Russia out of the G8. But what did that achieve? 8 years later, there is another war. And this time, it is not just Crimea. Russia is attacking the entire country. Now, here's what the West needs to do. They need to hit Russia where it hurts. This vote is all fine. India has abstained. They're possibly going to get Russia out of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is fine. But does it affect Russia where it hurts them the most? Their oil and gas exports. Unfortunately, that's easier said than done. I'm going to show you some numbers tonight. On the left of your screen is Europe's military assistance to Ukraine. Look at that number, $1 billion. Next, you have Europe's gas payments to Russia, $38 billion. You see the difference here, 1 billion versus 38 billion. $1 billion to Ukraine, $38 billion to Russia. In fact, it gets worse. The military assistance to Ukraine was given over many months, but the gas payments are for 43 days. Basically, since the invasion began, this is the kind of money that Europe has given to Russia. In other words, every day Russia was bombing Ukrainian cities. Every day Russia was killing Ukrainian soldiers. Europe was paying them $900 million per day. How is this justifiable? How is this not bankrolling Putin's war? And it's not just European officials. It's not like they're unaware. They know about these numbers. They know how much they're paying Putin. But if you ask them, they have a fixed response. We need more time. That's what they keep saying.
This gigantic difference has to highlight the importance and need of implementing what the Council asked to. We have to reduce energy dependence, and there is no doubt about the fact that the Commission will be a trailblazer and will lead this and will put forward the necessary measures to achieve this.
That's issue number one for Europe, clearly, hypocrisy. Issue number two is the lack of unity. One of their member states is openly supporting Vladimir Putin now, that is Hungary. We've talked about their Prime Minister Viktor Orban. This week he won a fourth term in office. That mandate has strengthened him. Orban's government is openly flouting the EU's position. He is planning to pay for Russian gas in rubles. He's opposing more sanctions to Putin. He's fighting restrictions on Russian nuclear fuel. Basically, he's breaking ranks with Brussels.
As for the intention of the European Commission that there should be some kind of common response from countries importing Russian gas, we do not think that is necessary. We don't think that it's necessary because we didn't make a joint contract with the Russians. Countries individually signed bilateral contracts. And how everyone modifies their contracts is none of our business, and we don't want to be part of it, just as no one has a say in how we modify our own contract.
So two ways of looking at this. One, Orban is clearly a pro-Putin leader. He has consistently called for closer relations with Russia, and this is just another example. Or two, how is Hungary different from the rest of Europe? They're both importing Russian gas. They're both paying billions of dollars. Why is Hungary the only one being singled out? Perhaps because of their political position. Viktor Orban is not a fan of Volodymyr Zelensky. In his victory speech, Orban criticized Zelensky. He called him an opponent. Within days, Zelensky returned the favor. He said Orban was afraid of Russian influence. Remember, this is all happening in the middle of a war. This war of words between Hungary and Ukraine. Soon, Hungary summoned the Ukrainian ambassador. They protested the statements made by Zelensky. And through all of this, the EU was standing by. No comments, no mediation. They let this public face-off continue. And by the way, it's not just Europe. America's response is equally problematic. They talk about sanctions, they talk about Western solidarity, but are they walking the talk? Again, let me show you some numbers. The US imports 16% of its uranium from Russia. 16%. But their sanctions do not touch uranium. Do you know why? Because if they banned Russian uranium, America would lose $1 billion. Money over principles. Another example is fertilizers. Russia makes up 6% of America's potash, 20% of diammonium phosphate, 13% of urea. These imports are also untouched. Why? Because they've all been listed as vital products. Even Russian oil is reportedly flowing into America. Russian officials say the US bought 100,000 barrels last week. If true, that's a 43% jump. But the West will not talk about any of this. Instead, they will talk about India's ambivalence.
And it is for an immediate end to violence. We continue to remain deeply concerned at the worsening situation and reiterate our call for end to all hostilities. When innocent human lives are at stake, diplomacy must prevail as the only viable option. Recent reports of civilian killings in Bucha are deeply disturbing. We have unequivocally condemned these killings and support the call for an independent investigation. The impact of the crisis has also been felt beyond the region with increasing food and energy costs, especially for many developing countries. It is in our collective interest to work constructively, both inside the United Nations and outside, towards seeking an early resolution to the conflict. India has been at the forefront of protecting human rights, right from the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
That was Ambassador Tirumurthy, India's representative at the United Nations. India has abstained, like I said, from the UNGA vote on removing Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. India, like you heard him say, said that we choose the side of peace and that no solution can come at the cost of innocent lives. India also called for an independent probe into the killings in Bucha and said that it was in the collective interest of everyone to work together to find a diplomatic resolution. 93 countries voted in favor of getting Russia out of the Human Rights Council. 24 voted against and 58 countries abstained. India was one of them.
India has abstained on the resolution adopted in the General Assembly today. We do so for reasons of both substance and process. Since the inception of the Ukrainian conflict, India has stood for peace, dialogue and diplomacy.
We're waiting for the reactions to come, and needless to say, the West should be happy. For the moment, let's turn to another story that we've been tracking very closely on this show. The situation in Sri Lanka. The island nation is going through its worst time. The protests are growing. The death bomb is ticking. At the center of the storm are the Rajapaksas, the ruling family, still brazening it out as they face the wrath of the people. Today, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa went to the parliament, his first appearance in this session. This is how he was greeted.
ගරු කතානායකතුමනි අද දින න්‍යාය පත්‍රයේ දිනට නියමිත කටයුතු වලට අදාළ විෂය අංක 1 2 7.
So public anger has reached the parliament. Remember, the Rajapaksas no longer command a majority. They're leading a minority government in Sri Lanka with an economy on life support and a new crisis staring them in the face. A debt payment is coming up. Debt worth $1 billion. And this money has to be paid in 4 months, and Sri Lanka doesn't have it. The outgoing finance minister raised an alarm today. I'm talking about Ali Sabri, the man who resigned from the post of finance minister less than 24 hours after taking over. He gave a statement in parliament today, and I have it with me here. This is what Ali Sabri had to say. We must look at how to restructure the $1 billion international sovereign bond payment maturing in July. We must go to the IMF. There is no solution, no other solution that I can see. Well, he's talking about a bailout. Colombo needs one and needs it ASAP because they have to pay more than $1 billion. How much more? $8.6 billion. That's the amount they have to pay this year. $8.6 billion, the debt payment due this year. Out of this $2.2 billion are interest payments. The rest will go to governments and creditors. In February, Sri Lanka had about $2.3 billion of foreign reserves. In March, that figure dropped to below $2 billion, and that won't even cover the cost of essentials. Forget about paying loan installments. More lawmakers believe a bailout is now absolutely necessary. Jeevan Thondaman is one of them. He is just 27 years old. He serves as a state minister for estate housing. Today, he gave a statement in parliament and he referred to a report from WION and argued why Sri Lanka needs a bailout. Listen to what he said.
Recently, I had witnessed a prominent Indian journalist who had mentioned that the fiscal policies of Sri Lanka are logic of taking a loan to repay a loan. It's like putting band-aids on a bullet wound. You know, that is not a permanent solution. We are just delaying the inevitable, and that inevitable being people's lives at stake, you know, the economy at stake. We have so many things at stake, and we are not focusing on the right things at hand.
So bailout is inevitable. The question is when and how. Colombo is again looking at Beijing. Would you believe it? Yesterday we told you how China has dumped the Rajapaksas, told them that it's all their fault and abandoned them in their hour of crisis. Sri Lanka has appealed for help at least twice. First, they asked for a $2.5 billion credit line. China refused. Then it sought a restructuring of Chinese debt. China has not obliged. And we're talking about $10 billion here. That's the kind of money that Sri Lanka owes China. So Sri Lanka is in dire straits. First, China said it's a result of their bad policies and the pandemic. Now it is fishing in troubled waters, trying to trap Sri Lanka further. I'll explain how. We told you that Sri Lanka needs a bailout, and they were looking at the IMF. Now, China says that's not a good idea. It wants Sri Lanka to take more Chinese debt. Officially, Chinese diplomats have not said a word, but behind the scenes, they remain engaged with Colombo. Reports say the Rajapaksa government has been given some advice. Don't go to the IMF, take more bilateral loans, which basically means take more Chinese loans. Is this even a practical suggestion? Sri Lanka has $45 billion of debt burden. Can China finance all of it? More importantly, should China finance all of it? You see, what's happening here is this. China is trying to seize the opportunity, capitalize on the misery of Sri Lanka, and they're doing it in more ways than one. Remember the Port City Colombo project. Colombo had announced it before the crisis began. Port City Colombo is an offshore financial business center. It is being built with China's help. China is pumping $14 billion into it. As of today, Sri Lanka is struggling to survive. Do you know what's happening at Port City Colombo? The work continues at breakneck speed. No interruptions. The Sri Lankan economy is sinking, but officials at the Colombo Port City project are fielding requests from Hong Kong. And these requests are coming from businesses that plan to move to Sri Lanka. It's business as usual for them. So the not-so-invisible hand of China is very much at play in Sri Lanka. The loans are bad enough. China can also pull the strings through big-ticket infrastructure projects. And that is the challenge that Sri Lanka has to overcome if it truly wants to help its economy recover. Sri Lanka has to stop depending on Chinese financing and find multilateral alternatives. The Rajapaksas have to stop running this country like a private limited company. Today, an advisory committee has been appointed. It will engage with the IMF. Some initial discussions have taken place, and we do hope that good sense prevails. Of course, we'll be tracking. So it's been an action-packed show. We are wrapping up this edition of Gravitas. We'll see you tomorrow.